want to introduce Yonatan Rieetti, who started as a student, like some of you know, from British school background, and a few years of dedication, but also has Chut Avot, like all of us have, especially his great-great-grandson of the Ben Ish Chai, a fantastic Gadol B'Torah, and also B'Drashot and the influence they had in Baghdad. And he's just here on a flying visit, but he's agreed to give us a little bit of his inspiration, and I'm sure it'll give a strength to all of us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank
I'm very grateful to Rosh Yeshiva Rabbi Horowitz for asking me to speak, but that's not what I'm grateful for. I came here 17 years old. I was not in this building, so this is an unfamiliar territory. But the Chevron Yeshiva and Rechel Chagai on Yeshiva Street, that was a place of extreme endearment to me. Even when I was persuaded to go to Gateshead after 6 weeks there, I never told Rosh Yeshiva this story. After 6 weeks of being there for Eluzman, I went into Rav Matzion Solomon, and I gave him 4 reasons why I was leaving, coming back. I told him that I didn't agree with the Derech HaLimud of Gateshead. Number 2, I said I have chevrusas laid up, set up here. I was learning with Rabbi Waldman, Rabbi Goldman. So it was Rabbi Goldman. What was his name?
Goldblum.
Rabbi Goldblum.
Nachum Goldblum.
Rabbi Goldblum. And I had a chevrus at the time, Jeremy Josephson.
Yes.
From Birmingham. Yeah, and we were very, very close friends. And I had sisters who were younger than me, and I was responsible for them. So I took twin sisters. They're still twins. It's a problem that's never been solved. And I told him those are the 4 reasons I was leaving. So then he said one line that saw right through me, and I ended up staying there for 6 years. But my career in learning Torah began in Yerushalayim. I was very comforted when I read Rabbi Arush, who was in the yeshiva similar to the same Tekufa, that I remember him saying that he arrived and had the Rosh Yeshiva said anything about his hair, he would have left straight away. And it was very comforting to me, because I remember getting out of the taxi, coming into Yerushalayim, and the biggest thing I was worried about was taking a haircut and letting go of my Levi jeans. And the first thing I saw was a bacher, a student, running up the stairs, and he was wearing jeans. And then I straight away said, well, if that is a student here, then I don't have to change who I am, at least not now. And so the reason I'm telling you that is because the fact that one felt so accepted for where one was holding made it a lot easier to be receptive to hadracha and guidance incrementally as one was ready for it. So I owe Yerushalayim and Rabbi Horowitz in particular for being my upline. In business they call it upline, meaning I'm his downline, and if I have any credit, it goes automatically to the upline. So Ashreinu, Ashrecha, Ashrechem. I didn't come prepared, so I'll ask you if there's anything specific you would like to ask me. I was here for 3 years. If there's something you want to ask me, either that's related to myself or to a particular subject or what I do, it's your time, and I don't want to waste it on myself.
I guess a question that would apply not only to myself, but I think for all the students here, is how to reconcile, most coming from a non-religious background, and then you have this frum background, right? So you have, like you said, jeans and colors, and then you have black and white. And I guess how to reconcile the two and not lose who you are and
Right.
serve Hashem.
Right.
But at the same time, obviously learning Torah and have, I guess, I won't say have fun, but
Right.
yeah, to enjoy life as well.
Okay. It's interesting. You would think that if you were consulted by HaKadosh Baruch Hu in how to design the Jewish people, if he would tell you, I have an idea, let's split the Jewish people into 12 tribes. So you might, I don't know, but you might say, Rabban Shalom, wouldn't it be more conducive to unity if we had one tribe? 12 is, that's a pretty broad spread of diversity, and the HaKadosh Baruch Hu says no. The Ikar Shalom, the main concept of being together, Shalom really means peace, comes from the word Shalom, is because you've got hafeichim, you've got differences that are actually coexisting. So strictly speaking, I would say that the time that I was able to put this on, this black hat over here, I remember exactly when it was. Rav Matisyahu Solomon called me into his office in Gateshead and said, why don't you wear a hat? Because I was a Bach in Yeshiva and I didn't wear a hat. I was the only Bach out of 300 who didn't wear a hat, and I just wore a cap. It was a nice, it was a workman's cap, but it was dignified, it wasn't undignified. So I said, because I don't think it would make any difference to my religious observance. So he said, don't you want to be like all the rest of the boys? So I said, my cap is really comfortable and I'm really fine with it. So he said, well, I think for your sake, to feel that you're really blending in more, I think you should get yourself a black hat. So I respectfully disagreed. I said, if Mashgiach can explain to me how it's going to change what's underneath my head, then maybe I can understand. And I say, so I tell you what, just put, so you're not standing out, at least buy a hat for Shabbos. So he was very smart, because I bought a hat for Shabbos, and once I was wearing it for Shabbos, it ended up spilling over to the rest of the week. But what I'm trying to answer in your question is, once the hat was meaningless to me, then it didn't matter that I wore it. Had I honestly thought that this was going to somehow make me feel I'm on a different madrega, I would not have worn it.
Can I mention something?
Yes.
We had a student also from England, Cambridge University, who was in yeshiva for some time, who was growing, and then he wanted to put on a hat. Yeah, in fact he put on. So I said, are you really ready for it? Do you need to do it? And I said, if you don't have to feel you've got to wear a hat. And afterwards he thanked me so much that I did the opposite. I said, don't wait till you're there. Till you put on a hat and jacket and so on. So, and that student has also grown to be one of the great personalities. We've got Smicha.
He teaches you Choshen Mishpat in Gateshead?
That's the one. That's the one.
Okay, I thought so.
That's the one. Yes.
Yeah. One of my biggest regrets in my whole life is when I came to Tvei Yerushalayim, a number of times I ended up being metapel, working with some of the newer students, and I felt it was taken away from my learning. And there was one occasion where I was asked to learn with a particular student who came from Cambridge, and he needed to know Aleph base. And I decided I'm going to put a red line. I'm here to feed myself, otherwise I'm just giving to everybody else. One of my biggest regrets, I got very few regrets, not because I have not done anything wrong, it's because I don't rent space in my mind for mistakes. I just try to move forward. But one of my biggest regrets in my life is that I didn't teach him Aleph base, because today he's a towering Talmud Chacham who's responsible for starting different groups of learning Choshen Mishpat throughout the world. So I really do wish I had taught him Aleph base. So you never know. Did I help answer your question a little bit? Yeah, I would say that I never felt a very strong pull towards looking black-hatted. it never meant anything to me, and because it doesn't, and that's why it was okay for me to start dressing a little bit more the way they do, but it still doesn't mean anything to me. Yeah, you had a question?
I have two questions. One is, what was your favorite Torah class? You may have mentioned that, maybe I missed it. What was your favorite? You said you're certain rabbis you connected with very well. What specific areas were you more closely intellectually involved with? That's the one.
What, in Yerushalayim?
Yes. I mean, was it halacha, was it
Right.
Musar, things like that. The second one is, how can you give an example of how your Torah background, Torah Yerushalayim, helped you in your life moving forward? So those two things.
Okay, there's two questions.
Yeah.
When I first came to Yerushalayim, there was a Mordechai Kramer who used to give a tefillah class. And right at the end, he opened up Aryeh Kaplan's first ever book in English called Rav Nachman's Wisdom. And I was introduced to Rav Nachman's teachings in English when I was about 14 years old. Now I was 17 and I'm hearing more. So I look forward to that 10 minutes at the end of the class a lot. And it spoke very deeply to me. I enjoyed Rabbi Aryeh Carmel, alav shalom. He was my first Gemara Rebbe.
Wow.
So we learned Gemara Brachas, and that's my favorite Masechta.
You don't even know. In fact, I'm going to give a talk on demons. On demons, given by it's printed. Aryeh Carmel when he was teaching.
Oh really? Oh really? On Daf Vav?
Yes.
Interesting.
On the Mazikin.
Mazikin.
Yeah.
Oh, so on Daf Gimel, where you're not allowed to enter Chorva for
Yes,
3
that's where it
reasons.
starts, but
Right. And then Daf Vav said, if you want to see them, it gives you a prescription. So he taught the first 19 bloods of Gemara Brachas, and I was very, very endeared to the Masechta through that. So I really enjoyed that a lot. Then there was one personality, Rabbi Chaim Kramer, who was mashgiach in the evenings. And it bothered me a lot at first, but I started to chap. Every time I asked him a question, he wouldn't answer me. Instead, he would take me to the Sfarim shelves, and instead of telling me the answer, he would learn the answer inside with me. And that always made a very deep impression. Not so much as his Bekias, it was much more that instead of me relying on an outsider to give me information that I don't have access to, he would show me where to find it, and then we would learn it inside. So for me, trying to graduate from relying on others teaching me what it says to at least aspire to become independent in learning. Since then I developed different ways to help actually children and teenagers in the yeshiva system, and almost all my time is completely dedicated to helping kids with their learning. So that was those I hope answers your first question.
Yeah.
What was your second
question? What was your? I used to answer the second question as well. So moving forward, how did it affect your life? So in the 3 years here. So you said.
I think what I enjoyed tremendously, possibly the most in Yerushalayim, was what Rabbi Horowitz did, which was different to Or Sameach and Eshet Torah. At the time, those were the three main Baal Teshuva yeshivas. When I went to visit Or Sameach, the tremendous dagesh, emphasis on learning Gemara, primary sources, which is good, it's very good. I don't want to say but, and I don't want to say a criticism. I do feel that it gave the impression that if you're not going to go in this direction, you're not really graduating into the frum world. Eshet Torah, I enjoyed very much the idea that it was very organized in terms of Torah mitzvahs, that the 48 ways. I stayed in Yerushalayim because as a newcomer, Dvar was offering a taste of different parts of Yiddishkeit from different types from Rebbeim, and I felt that was in a certain way it was actually helping me prepare myself not to think that there's one way that's right and the others aren't as good. Rather, there was a certain confidence, if you want to call it that Dvar had in employing someone like, let's say, Rabbi Pinchas Waldman, who he didn't do the pin test, but you could ask him any 2 lines anywhere in Shas Bavli, and we would test him. He had 120 seconds to find it. Never failed us ever once.
What was his name again?
Rabbi Pinchas Waldman.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, you've heard of him.
He's sitting at the base of Medrash.
Yeah, that's all he does.
120 seconds to find.
Any 2, I would. You can read up to any 2 lines anywhere in Shas Bavli. You don't know this?
I've heard of it, but
we need to know.
Okay, so I'm sorry I let out a secret. I didn't know there was a secret. You had someone who could answer any question almost anywhere on the major sources. Rabbi Horowitz was extraordinary in any basic hashkafa question, philosophy. If you needed to bring comparisons, whether it's in English literature, Rabbi Horowitz was familiar. So that gave an enormous amount of credibility to everything else that the Rosh Yeshiva had to say on whether it's Hashkafa and Yiddishkeit in general. We had personalities like Rabbi Chaim Kramer, who himself was an electrician by day, and a mashgiach in Yeshiva in the evenings. I guess it's not his fault. He had a photographic memory, so it's not really his fault. So he knew Shas Bavli, Yushalmi, Tosefta, Sifra, Sifri, Mishnayos, Medrash, and Arizal, and so it was very interesting how I could ask him a question almost anywhere, and he would learn the answer all over the place. And Shulchan Aruch, it was pretty astonishing. So I'm not making necessarily comparison to other yeshivas, but I know that one of the things that was outstanding in Dvar was there was a broad menu based on the needs of people coming. We had a contingency which were British, and most of them had finished university or were going to very prestigious universities, so they were already intellectually curious. You had a large number of Americans who were traveling. Some of them came from broken homes and were looking for more meaning in their lives. You had French, a contingency of French and Spanish and Russians. So I found I actually traveled the most ever in my life, and I've traveled a lot. I went through Europe twice on a bicycle. I've been to many countries, but I never did as much traveling as I did in 3 years in one building.
Wow.
As I did in Yerushalayim. So I think it helped expose one to much more types of, from Rebbeim, you had Hasidim, there was a Rabbi Naftali something.
Shimon Naftali.
Shimon Naftali. Naftalis? Naftalis, yeah. Yeah, I remember him. And, you had different shades of Rabbi Krupnik. He was Lubavitch, Ois Lubavitch, whatever. And he was a Muslim from Moshe Feinstein. There was just such an interesting variety that if you had I have to say this very politically correctly. If you have a Rosh Yeshiva who has this is how you present Judaism, then that one usually will not have inner confidence to expose your students to a broader version. So unless you have that confidence, Rabbi Aryeh Carmel, Talmud Muvchak from Rabbi Dessler. So this was a very broad range of exposure that I think helped shape one to accept that when you go out into the real world, one doesn't have to be stuck on thinking this is how a Jew is supposed to be or look like.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that helped answer that question.
Yeah, I just want to add a comment. Well, the first time I was in Israel, I actually picked up one of Chaim Kramer's books. And I've been meaning to meet him because I liked his book very much.
Right.
And when I went back to Canada at that time, traveling into a Jewish neighborhood, I accidentally stumbled into a shul and he was teaching a Torah class. So it was just by Hashkafa Pratis. I didn't even know where he was at the time. So.
Okay, so he's actually been my personal Rebbe for since I'm 17.
Oh, wow.
So that's 39 years.
So what are you doing exactly
I
now?
speak to him almost every day.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
what kind of, you're traveling, you said, you're helping kids. Can you tell us about what you're doing? That sounds very exciting.
Most of what I do is teacher training. I worked for over 20 years private tutoring. I found that for the most part, there are too many very serious gaps in the educational system, the yeshiva system. I don't want Hassan, this should be taken as like a negative or a drug. I'm just saying it as an observation. I myself suffered enormously in trying to understand text. And I left this yeshiva, for example, I left having learnt about 7 Masechtas, but I still couldn't open up on my own. That really didn't happen till I met a balabas by the name of Mr. Book, who he's over 100 years old today. He was a balabas in Gateshead, and I hired him to learn with me one-on-one. Sorry?
Balabas?
He was a balabas, he was a working man.
Okay.
He was very embarrassed to admit they'd finished the entire Shas Bavli 12 times be'iyun, 12 times in depth. He had learned from Rabbi Gedalia Rabinowitz, who was the Rosh Kollel and Yeshiva in Sunderland, who himself had learnt in Volozhin. So my Rebbe, Mr. Book, learnt from him for 17 years one-on-one. He taught me the Derech HaLimud of Volozhin. I was outraged. How we have deviated from the original Masorah. So I ended up deciding I'm not going to learn the Yeshiva Masechtas anymore. So I opened up the Yeshiva Masechta in front of me, and on top of it I put Gemara Brachas. When I finished that, I put Shabbos, and then Eruvin. I continued doing that. I started learning Derech HaLimud of Volozhin. In Volozhin, the Batlanim, they would finish a Masechta 30, 40 times. And the Mitsuyanim, the ones who were more motivated, would finish 101 plus times. Every time they came to a Rashi, every time they came to a pasuk in the Gemara, stop learning and open up where that pasuk is in Tanakh, in the Pentateuch or Scripture, and learn the entire chapter of that verse. So they always got it in context. But what I started working on, and that's what I do now mostly, is I try to help teachers understand what's missing for kids, and especially in Gemara. Love you, bless you, Gesundheit.
Thank you.
So I go through, for example, for learning Chumash, I explain you've got to have clear identification of every single letter, every ois, and not mix it up with any other letters. Every single nakuda, every vowel. Now you're ready for blending. Now you're ready for building vocabulary. Happens to be out of all the words in Bereshis, for example, there are 16,258 words. If you don't mind not counting it now, you can do it in the break. There are 16,258 words in the entire Bereshis, but because of the frequency of reappearance of many shirashim, 2 or 3 letter root words, you actually only need to know 197 words to access 81%. That's over 13,000 words. So I created photos for 300 shirashim, which I teach to pre-1A and first grade and second grade, and if necessary even adults. And these will give them approximately 84% translatability of the entire Chumash Bereshis. You teach them all the prefix suffixes, there's only 46 of them. So these are the raw tools. If you get these 200, 300 shirashim and the 46 prefix suffixes, you're good to go to translate intelligently 80+% of Chumash Bereshis, and on a spot check, it's between 65 and 80% of the rest of the entire Chumash and the Nevi'im Rishonim. That's the book of Joshua, Samuel, and the book of Kings, and Shoftim, book of Judges. So that's something that I've created a lot of materials to teach teachers how to teach kids these materials so the kids can teach themselves. There's much more to be said on that. I'll move to the Gemara part. Gemara, what I found is there are 4 items the Gemara assumes I know before I'm allowed into the text of the Gemara. If I don't have these 4, I'm handicapped at different levels, but I'm handicapped. Number 1, can I read the words? If I cannot read the words, there's no way I can become the goal of independent learning, because I can't reconstruct if I don't know how to read it properly. So I encourage use Tuvia Shas or any Gemara which has Nikud, Menukot. It's much easier to be able to read. So number 1, can I read the words accurately? Number 2, can I translate the individual words? Number 3, can I punctuate the text in a way that's intelligent. Where's a comma? Where's a full stop? A period? Where's a question mark? An exclamation mark? Where's there a quote from a verse? After you've got these three, now we can go to number 4, which is put these three together. Can you make Pashup Pshat? Can you make string them together? Can you make sense out of this one line? I call them bites of information. It's actually based on the Stipler Hatzal. He offers that you should break an Amud, a column of the Gemara, into 10 parts. I break it up even to smaller, either for Balei Tshuva or for people who have been learning but don't realize that they really want to become independent and not dependent on a Maggid Shir. So, for example, in Daf Yomi, please forgive me. I don't mean this as a negative, but be honest with yourselves. Out of thousands of people attending Daf Yomi, in each shir, who's the one person, if you had to vote for one person who's gaining the most out of the whole class? Who is it?
Same as with any shir.
Who is it?
The teacher.
The teacher. But how is that supposed to be how it is?
Yes, you're supposed to
No,
learn to teach. That's
no.
what the Rosh Hashiva always says.
But everybody must
You learn.
benefit together.
So in the Milchamta Shel Torah, what you have is the meeting of minds, where the Gemara, in its dialogue, is assuming that you can read the words, translate each individual word, punctuate the text. I mean, punctuation wasn't invented about 300 years ago, but I'm explaining where the Gemara is an Amud. There's no vowels, there's no punctuation, there's no breaks in sentences or paragraphs, so it's assuming you've got all that ability to make sense out of it. So these are the 3 parts before we get to number 4, which is, okay, now string these together. Can you come to a simple meaning, a Pashup Pshat? The next level, which is starting now, level 5, that's where the Gemara starts. And what's that? What question do you have on Pashup Pshat? Do you have any other questions? Level 6 of this is what's your answer? Now what's going to happen is you're getting the student to figure it out themselves. Is this making sense to you? What happens next is very interesting. The students will often come up with a question which is going to come up in the next few lines in the Gemara, or Rashi is addressing that because there's a piece of information that the Gemara is assuming which Rashi will fill in, or the Tosfos will have a kasha, and guess what will happen now? If you come to the question which Tosfos or Rashi or a Rishon comes to, how do you feel when the Maggid Shir is able to tell you, oh, that's Rashi's problem. You got the teretz of Tosfos on Rashi. How do you feel about yourself? You're dialoguing with Rishonim. You're inside, or you come up with the question that Abai is about to ask 2 lines later. So these are 6 very simple steps that I train Rebbeim in America of how to get the children engaged in the learning, so that no matter what their starting point is, first take care of these first 3, string it together, come up with number 4. Okay, now we start where the Gemara begins. And the Gemara is inevitably going to find a problem, because that's its job. It's a little bit based on Derech Tvunos of the Ramchal. You can look over there, it's a bit complicated to say.
Look behind you.
Oh, here you are. There you go. It's a very kitzur lashon, but it's complicated. But it's worth understanding the logical sequence of how the Gemara's, so to speak, mind works. Because there is a pattern, there is a map, there is a consistency. And once one gets a little bit of that map, those keys, then once you know how to read a map, it doesn't matter which map you put in front of you, it's the same keys to open it up.
You've seen the latest edition?
Yes, the
3
Feldstein.
things.
Yeah.
3 books.
The 3 books in one, yeah. Yeah. It's very technical.
So,
Yeah,
I don't a share on it.
Oh, excellent. You need a shear on it because the English, which is very good, you actually need the Hebrew to translate. It's almost like Sonsino. I don't know if any of you remember what Sonsino looked like, but you needed the Gemara to translate the English because it was just too much. It was too broken and too literal. So you really do need a shear to break it open. It's a code. Thank you for your patience.
Good.
Thank you.
I hope that helped
I
answer
just
your
want to
question.
show you here. This shear was printed out, I can see it, Demons, the Person
Oh,
of
right.
You by Aryeh Carmel, and even, this is very rare, it says, ideas developed while learning, discussing the first chapter of Prophets with group 2, Yeshiva
Oh my gosh.
comprising. It mentions A. Blum, Goodman, Krasner, Lubovsky, Newman Jonathan Rieetti.
Wow.
Sosa Jonathan Toll.
Wow. Wow. So I've got written confirmation I was in his year.